in Singapore who told it was Rabbi Levi Shintov.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why he was there, but apparently
Levi Shintov, which Levi Shintov though? Okay.
That's what I was told.
It's probably late. Okay. One of our shluchim, Levi Shintov, married an Australian, so it makes perfect sense.
Oh yeah,
that
that's
he
like
would fly to
easy.
Australia. That's one of the ways to fly.
Oh.
Now the easiest is Emirates. Everybody goes through the Emirates, but Singapore also there's great airlines. So if you fly Singapore Airlines, except it takes a long time from Singapore to Europe.
Is it safe for Jews to fly that?
Yeah, Singapore's fine. Singapore's fine. Indonesia is not friendly. Singapore's fine. My wife and I actually stayed overnight in Singapore.
Oh.
So we, just went to a hotel, came back. Okay. We're near the end of the second parak. The second parak, the Rebbe has been explaining to us that the pshat in the pasuk Adam ki yakri mikem korban lavaya mina behema mina bakar mina tzayin takriva es korbanchem. A person's two pshatim in the pasuk Adam ki yakri. A person who wants to come close to the Kadosh Baruch Hu, mikem. It's dependent on you. Every single person can. The second pshat in the word mikem Adam ki yakri mikem korban lavaya. From you is the korban to Hashem. What's that? Mina behema. From the behema. What's that? Behema shebeliba shel Adam. Hainu nefesh b'amis. The animal soul. Mina baka, mina tzayin, different types of nefesh b'amis. Just like the Rebbe said, we sacrificed a korban on the mizbeach, so too we can elevate and sacrifice our nefesh b'amis. And just like in the sacrifice on the mizbeach, there was a fire from above, so too, relative to sacrificing, elevating, illuminating our nefesh b'amis, there's a fire from above. And what's the fire from above? The burning love of the nefesh b'amis. Right? And that, and this is something that comes up all the time in Chassidus, and is unique to Chassidus to a great degree, in all fairness, right? Is that not that no one else believes in this, it's not talked about as often. When you're talking about bringing about a change in yourself, you're talking about trying to help another person bring about a change in themselves. Yes, of course, there has to be a fire from below, which is the discipline of the Nefesh B'amis. But there also has to be a realization that there's a fire from above, that there's a Nefesh Elokis. So when you're talking to another Jew, you're talking to a godly soul. Yes, there's a Nefesh B'amis there that might be trying to block the message. Or the Nefesh B'amis could actually be the shaliach for the message. But the true being that you're talking to is the Nefesh Elokis, is a godly soul, so too relative to yourself. So now how do we access that? So that's what the Rebbe told us at the end of Shir on Thursday, and we'll just see it again. We'll finish the chapter and start chapter 3. Okay. Starting on page 114, how do you get the Nefesh B'amis to love the Eibishter? Fourth line. Right in the middle of the line. This comes through the clothing of the Nefesh Elokis and the Nefesh B'amis. Now, Rebbe's going to explain what that means in 2 lines. But first, why is that necessary? The Tchila, at first, the nature of the Nefesh B'amis, and the Nefesh B'amis, ein lo shum yediyah v'hergish, he has no understanding and no sensitivity in godly matters at all. The Nefesh B'amis is not naturally sensitive to godly matters. That doesn't mean that he isn't naturally able to be educated about godly matters. That is true, but without that education, will he necessarily be interested in it? The Nefesh B'amis, no. Might there be some way in which, for whatever reason, the Kadosh Baruch Hu decides that in this person he wants to give a great revelation of the Nefesh Elokis, so somehow that Nefesh Elokis reveals itself in the person's Nefesh B'amis without any Aveda from below? That can happen. And so the person somehow starts thinking about godly things in their conscious reality. Generally, though, it depends on Aveda. We have to educate our own Nefesh B'amis, and educate other people's Nefesh B'amis. But also, I can't educate anybody else if I'm not educated myself. And what does that mean? So the Rebbe explains, Amnam, however, the however is relative to the fact that the Nefesh Bahamis has no sensitivity to Elokus. It can, though, just naturally doesn't. Al Yadei Hislavshus Nefesh Elokis, by virtue of the inclothing of the Nefesh Elokis, what does that mean? Umisbeinen bisbeinenus Eloki, to contemplate godly meditations, contemplations, that Gam Nefesh Bahamis Yukol Asigi, that also the Nefesh Bahamis is able to comprehend. What does that mean? Learn Chassidus. Learn about the Eibishter in such a way that human intellect can understand the ideas, and human intellect will get excited about the ideas. And once human intellect gets excited about the ideas, it might be that I'll have some emotional connection to those ideas. And once I have an emotional connection to those ideas, they become part of me, part of my life, part of what matters to me. First thing I have to do is educate my Nefesh Bahamis, and the first thing I have to educate my Nefesh Bahamis about is that the Eibishter is actually something that we are able to comprehend on some level. Now, obviously, on an absolute level, we can't understand the Eibishter. But when we say that, we're talking about Atzmus. Can't understand the essence of the Eibishter in any way, shape, or form. But can we understand all sorts of different things relative to godly light? Yes, why not? I don't understand. Why can't we understand the difference between Mamala and Sevev? It's the first chapter in Bosi leGani, Tafshin Yud. We should understand it pretty well. We should be able to give examples in the powers of the soul that are clothed in the body, examples of the powers of the soul that are connected to, or Mamala, examples of powers of the soul that are examples for, or Sevev. No, that's not. Chazal say just like the neshama fills the body, so God fills the world. So we can relate to that. Believing in the creation of the world is not something that, believing that God created the world is not something that any chassid should have. Chas v'shalom, he should believe God created the world. He should know God created the world and he can explain it to you. It's not a function of emunah, it's a function of knowledge. I might have emunah relative to how my car engine works, but my mechanic doesn't. He knows how my car engine works. I have basic emunah that when I turn the key, it's going to probably work. If it doesn't, I probably don't understand why. He does. If he's honest, he takes care of it. If he's dishonest, he also takes care of it. He just takes care of all sorts of other things that don't have to be taken care of. But his relationship to a car engine is not emunah. It's das. He understands it. Well, he learned about it. Okay, so there's all sorts of levels of godly reality that you and I can understand intellectually. Right? So we don't have to believe in them. What's emunah? Emunah is a power of the soul. Emunah is a power of the soul that allows us to connect to levels of elokus that are beyond our intellect. Why should I use emunah to connect to those aspects of godliness that are within the possible my intellect understanding? Now, it starts off, the Rebbe just told us, it starts off as emunah. Why? Well, because the intellect of my Nefesh Bahamis doesn't understand anything about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. Whatever. I wasn't taught anything about a Kadosh Baruch Hu. How was I supposed to know anything about a Kadosh Baruch Hu? The same way most of us probably know nothing about the engine of a car, because we weren't taught about the engine of a car. If we were, so then we will know. If we weren't, then we don't know. Okay, that's fairly straightforward. Okay, but if my Nefesh Bahamis is educated about Elokus, then there's all sorts of aspects of godly reality that are no longer in the realm of Emunah, they're in the realm of Das. And the whole idea is to bring Emunah into Das. Chabad is not about intellect, Chabad is about Emunah. Bringing Emunah into conscious reality. Those levels of reality that your soul connects to should become part of what your intellect can also connect to. And then it becomes part of your life, it becomes part of you. if it's constantly emunah, so then emunah is nice, emunah is great, but how do I access it? What's it got to do with my everyday life? Ma'aminim b'nei ma'aminim. Every single Jew believes in the Eibishter, absolutely, completely, and totally. Do we often see that somehow touched in the world and therefore it resonates? Yes, that happens. But is it necessarily a function of everyday existence? No, why not? Well, because it hasn't come into Das. It hasn't come into their conscious reality. It's there. All right? I put on tefillin in my heart. Okay, so I'm going to put on tefillin in my heart. Peter Greb has an amazing explanation of the pasuk in Boruch. If in my statutes you will walk. Now, generally, walking means progress. You'll grow, you'll progress. Right? That's why we're called walkers, and the angels are called standers. they stand in one place and we progress, we change. So how does that relate to a chayk? I understand how that would relate to a mishpat. A mishpat is something that I understand intellectually. So I understand how I could grow in my intellectual appreciation of the mishpat. But how do I grow in a chayk? A chayk is sort of black and white. Either I do it or I don't. It's not something I understand. Either I eat kosher food or I don't eat kosher food. I could have some understanding of the need to eat kosher food, but that's not an inyan in kosher. That's an inyan in relating to God. That I understand. I can grow in that. But the chayk itself, how do I walk in a chayk? Chayk is l'mayla mitam v'das. It's beyond intellect. So what work do I do exactly to grow in a chayk? Right? The work would be relative to my appreciation of godliness in general, not the chayk per se. Right? And once there's appreciation of Elokus, so then the chayk happens. Mamela, if you appreciate Elokus, and then all of a sudden you hear about something that the Eibishter wants you to do, so then if you have an appreciation of how things work, and you have a certain level of Kabbalah's right? So you hear about something, you say, oh, guy, gee, I didn't know I have to do that. Okay, so he does this. It's not like he has to sit there and think about, how do you think about it exactly? Okay. How do you think about shatnez? I'm going to, understand shatnez. What does that mean, understand? God said, don't put wool and linen together. Why? I don't know. He just did. So either I do it or I don't. It's hard to come to a deeper understanding. Now, really, I should be the same by murder, okay, but I can understand why murder isn't a reasonable thing, and it might be that someone who chas v'shalom doesn't understand that, you could sit down with them and explain, like human beings, and they have families, and they have feelings, and you might hurt other people, and it's not such a good idea, and there's what to talk about. So the Rebbe says in the Friedrich, it says an amazing thing. What's a chayk? So a chayk is that place that is above your intellect. Okay.
How do you spell
Chayk, chet, vav, kuf. Im b'chut kotai telechu. It's a parsha, the end of Vayikra. The very end of Vayikra. Okay, so if my intellect is here, then what's this? This is all chayk. This is all l'mayla min haseichel. What if my intellect is here? So now what's l'mayla min haseichel? Up here. This is no longer l'mayla min haseichel. It's not part of my seichel. What if my intellect understands up to there? So then this is l'mayla min haseichel. So the chayk is moving. Believe in God creating the world, chas v'shalom. Don't you dare believe God created the world. You should know God created the world, and you should know how He did it, because you learn Chassidus. You should be able to explain it cogently and succinctly to other people. Why? That you can't explain. How? That you can explain. I don't know why He did it. Oh, you'll tell them He wanted dir b'dachtonim. Okay, so then they might be curious enough, right, to ask, well, why did He want to dir b'dachtonim? And you'll say, I don't know. He just did. And they'll say, well, that's weird. I said, why is that weird? There's also things we don't know, and there's things we do know, and this is one of the things we don't know. Do you know why someone made it go Big Bang? No. Okay, but if you want to explain it that way, so you can explain it that way, and then back to the why of it. Well, what's the why of it? Don't get it. Okay, what? So you and I probably won't explain it in terms of a Big Bang. We'll explain it in terms of a ratzon pashut livrei, a basic desire to create wherever that came from. And that basic desire, then the next step in that process was what's called a hashara, some sort of estimation as to how to do that, so to speak. And then the certain reality came into being called, all sorts of things happened in between, but a level of reality called Ak came into being. What's Ak? Ak is the Ratzon Kloli, the general Ratzon for the four worlds. Right? The general Ratzon for all four worlds is called Adam Kadmon, Machshava Kaduma da Ak, the primordial thought of Ak. Okay, fine. You'll run across that in Chassidus all the time. Right? Then what that thought has to come down into dibur, so to speak, into speech, so it can be expressed outside of itself. And the next level is Keser, Vayla Matzilis, 5 levels. Where are those 5 levels? May I? Boruch Shamar V'Hayelam, Ratzon HaPashut Livrei. Boruch Hu, the Hashara, the estimation. Baruch Ha'emer V'Eser, Machshava Keduma Ta'ak. Baruch Gezer Kayim, bringing that down into deeper, into some sort of state of revelation. Baruch Ha'eser Bereshis, the one who makes Bereshis, which is the Keser of Eilam Atzilus. Where do you see those 5 levels again?
What page were you reading that from?
Baruch Sha'amar.
First, what is
Right at the beginning of the Birchas Kriya Shema, the first bracha, right? In this book, 6 lines in. So the Rebbe Shab talks about this in Ein Beis, what I just said and what I'm about to say. Elokei Eilam, B'rachamecha Rabim, 2 different levels. Elokei Eilam, God. It's interesting, it says Elokei Eilam, and yet it has nothing to do with the world. It's just Etzem. There's nothing to say about him. You can't describe him, just God. Okay, that's Etzem. B'rachamecha Rabim, what's that? That's Atzmus turning itself into a luminary. What an amazing thing. Right? Atzmus is Atzmus. The Eibishter is the Eibishter. He is what he is. Right? We've talked about it. Absolute isness. Where did he come from? He didn't. Why is he there? Just is. What does he do? He doesn't do anything. Just is. There's no function, no purpose. He just is. Anyways, he's just beyond function, beyond purpose. He's the absolute being and is the source of all other being. Okay, fine. So that being at some point decided that he wanted to create a world. So what's the first thing that happens, so to speak, in that being himself? He becomes a ma'or. He becomes a luminary. Because what's going to emanate from him? Or. So he, so to speak, turns himself into a ma'or. Right? Before that, if there's no existence of or, is there any need for an existence of a luminary? No. So the Eibishter, so to speak, turns himself into a luminary, a source of light. Even though the Rebbe Shab goes to great lengths and don't ever call Atzmus a source of light, because it is ultimately a source of light. But to describe it as a source of light is limiting it, and there's no way you can limit Atzmus. It's beyond all limitation. It happens to be that it also is a ma'or, a luminary. Okay. And then what? After those 2 levels come into being, which is basically Ratzon HaPashut Livrei, the basic desire to create, which means there's going to be light, and that light's going to emanate down, light meaning godly energy, that's going to emanate down and be clothed in vessels which will allow it to express itself in a separate and finite way. So what happens right after that when you say Elokei Eilam B'rachamecha Rabim? Rachem Aleinu, Adeinu Zeinu, Tzur Mizgabeinu, Magen Yishenu, Mizgab Badenu. Same 5 levels that we just talked about in Baruch Shamar. Ratzon HaPashut Livrei, the Hashara, the estimation of, so to speak, how to make that happen. Machshava Keduma Ta'ak, the general desire for 4 worlds. The bringing that down into a place where it could ultimately become the source of the 4 worlds, which is Keser of Atzilus. Those are the 5 levels. Right? Okay. So we don't have to believe that. We can know that. Obviously, it's based on a belief system. I get that. But so is a car engine. If you don't believe in cause and effect, then a car engine isn't going to work, is it? It's based on a certain belief system that things work a certain way. Right? Can I prove that it's going to work that way? No. But I believe it's going to work that way because the last 7 zillion times anybody tried, that's what happened. So reasonable to assume the 7 zillionth and one, it'll also do the same thing. That's a perfectly reasonable conclusion. Can I prove that an aspirin is going to cure a headache? No. Do I rely on an aspirin for cure? Yeah, because it's been, how many times have you taken aspirin and your headache went away? So, okay, so I figure it's probably going to work this time. All right, so I believe in the fact that the aspirin will, no, I would say, do I believe or know that aspirins cure headaches? I'd probably call that knowing, right? Does a 2-year-old know that? No, he has to learn it. Don't chew them. Aspirin, I'm dating myself. When was the last time anybody took an aspirin? Bayer still is it that exists Bachlal Bayer? Yeah, there's still you can buy Bayer aspirin.
You can buy Bayer aspirin.
Yeah, but only people have heart disease and people have headaches take Excedrin. Isn't that right?
What is Ak again?
Adam Kadmon. It's the general Ratzon for the four worlds. Meaning the architect has a plan for a 4-story building. Each floor, has its own particular Ratzon, will. This is what he wants the 4th floor to look like. This is what he wants the 3rd floor to look like. This is what he wants the 2nd floor to look like. This is what he wants the 1st floor to look like. Okay. But there's also his general Ratzon of the 4-story building. So that's Ak. Each world has its own Kesser. It's like Kesser Kololi. General Keter. You'll run into it. It's out there. Ak. No, meaning it's brought in Chassidus a lot. It's
basically like the
general Ratzon for the 4 worlds. That's Ak.
okay.
And the mashal is an architect who has a general desire for the 4-story building. Each floor has its own unique characteristic. There's lots of detail in that general desire, but there's a general desire. The detail comes later. So the Eibishter wants Atzilus to look a certain way. Well, that's the Ratzon of Atzilus. He wants Elam Abriya to look a certain way. Well, that's the Ratzon of Elam Abriya. But he wants there to be a reality called Seder Ishtalshelus, all 4 worlds. That's called Ak. Adam Kadmon, primordial man. I don't know, say that. Okay. So, what can we do? We can educate our Nefesh HaBahamis to have an appreciation of Elokus. Right? The more you bring godly ideas into your conscious intellect and conscious reality, so then the first of all, the more godliness becomes part of your world, and more so, the loftier your connection to godliness can become as your ideas become more and more sophisticated, so then your appreciation of what's beyond that becomes more and more sophisticated. God created the world, okay, that's true, but that's all I know about him. I don't know very much. Right? And no one should suffice with that. Right? It's not enough, because there's more. He did create the world, right? But again, that can be part of our das. Can I prove it in a laboratory? Do we believe in love or know there's something called love? I think most of us know there's something called love. Prove it in a laboratory. Can't prove love in a laboratory. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It doesn't mean you don't know it. Why? You experienced it. Okay, so experience a little bit of godliness and you'll know that there's something called God. This brings the Nefesh HaBahamis close. This brings the Nefesh HaBahamis to a place where it appreciates Elokus. It thinks about Elokus. It's bothered by Elokus. Wonders about Elokus. Talks about Elokus. Verbrangs about Elokus. Learns about Elokus. There's a general impression made. Chakika is an impression, right? But Nefesh HaBahamis, the Elokus who gam came, davra muvan v'musag. That Elokus is also something that can be understood and comprehended. Because the single biggest klipa is where someone tells you can't understand any of these ideas. People who never learned Chassidus, one of the first things they'll say about people who do learn is, they don't understand anything. As soon as you hear that, you realize the person never learned a line of Chassidus in their life. Because if they ever learned a line of Chassidus in their life, so they would realize, wait a minute, there's all these amazing ideas that we can understand. There's also things we can't understand. Of course, there's things we can't understand. But that's what's so interesting. Once you start understanding certain aspects of godly reality, so then you appreciate just what those things you don't understand are. And those things that a lot of people say you don't understand, that's not true. You should and you can and you should and get it together and learn it. So what happens if you get the Nefesh HaBahamis on board? who rav tvuis b'keich shor, great produce in the power of the ox. Once you harness the ox, whoa. Because the Nefesh Bahamis tends to be rather passionate. Naturally, the Nefesh Bahamis is more emotional than intellectual. Naturally, the Nefesh Elokis is more intellectual than emotional. That doesn't mean they don't both have both parts. But naturally, the Nefesh Bahamis is more into emotional, subjective reality, and the Nefesh Elokis is into intellectual, objective reality. Of course, the difference between intellect and emotion is objective and subjective. 2 + 2 is 4, has nothing to do with you. Your feelings, well, that's you. It's emotions, it's you. So the Nefesh Elokis might be somewhat cool and reserved. But once Nefesh Bahamis gets involved, it's a passion and a bren, a burning desire to get somewhere. Shemishapech mibahami yusei, that it's transformed from its behemishkeit, its animalistic nature, v'oile v'nichlal berishvei eish hachuka, and it's elevated and incorporated in the burning fire of desire. The Nefesh Elokis. The Nefesh Elokis has a burning desire to the Eibishter. Now the Nefesh Bahamis is part of that. Nefesh Bahamis is that feels very at home in such a place of emotional fervor. Ukemei shal yedei. That's the. Hopefully, none of you will be sitting here around Shavuos time, right? Because you'll be in learning more difficult Maimarim, etc. But Shavuos time, generally, most people that spend some time looking at Maimarim that discuss the difference between the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Bahamis as is expressed in Sfir Sa'imer, which is trying to get the Nefesh Bahamis to love the Eibishter, that 49-day process. And one of the things that we talk about is a pasuk, Acharecha narutza, after you we will run. Who's we? Once we get the Nefesh Bahamis on board, so we start to run to the Eibishter, as opposed to stroll calmly. We'll run. Nefesh Bahamis, when he wants something, when does he want it? Now. Nefesh Elokis, patient. Nefesh Bahamis doesn't tend to be so patient. So if he wants Coca-Cola, he wants it now. He might even go in a car and look around in 7 different places to find a store that's open so he can buy some Coca-Cola. Right? Now, it's not so hard these days with gas stations, okay? But so what if the Nefesh Elokis, what if Nefesh Bahamis wants Elokus? So he'll stay up all night trying to figure out what the Eibishter is about. Right now, sometimes he has to be told not to do that. He has to get up in the morning. Oh, okay. But that's the nature of the Nefesh Bahamis. He'll do those. He'll just want to sit and learn, and I'm in the middle of a mimer, and it's 3 a.m. Yeah, but wait a minute, you have Chassidus 7:30 in the morning. You have to be up on Chassidus 7:30 in the morning. You've signed on. That's what you do. That's your job. No, but look, I'm in the middle of a mimer, right? That the Nefesh Bahamis might say that. He's like that. Right? At that particular point, he's wrong. But Baruch Hashem, he's into that. But he's wrong about staying up too late at night to learn Chassidus. Therefore, I can't get up in the morning. That's a mistake, but it's a beautiful mistake to make, but it's a mistake. Right? That's why most, obviously we don't, but most Lubavitch Jews have lights out. Mm-hmm. In the Yeshiva Ketana, so it's not only lights out, electricity out. Like, the lights will go out at a certain point, and then there's no more electricity, so they can't even have their own private little light if they snuck one in. Right? And they go to sleep. But, sometimes things. Our oldest son, it was one of the greatest moments of education I've ever been part of. I was only part of it because I heard about it and my son was there. So since he's part of me, so I was part of it. He was 14, 15, Yeshiva Ketana in Lud. And it's near the end of the year. And it might have been Shir Gimel, might have been Shir Beis. I'm not sure. I don't think it was Shir Aleph. Because Shir Aleph, they're scared stiff to break any rules. Baruch Hashem. So I don't know when it was. But he and some chevra got some candles. They were for bringing, and so they ended up getting some candles and lighting some candles and staying up an hour or two after curfew in their room. They're sitting in for bringing. I don't think they had any. Maybe they had some bomba or something. I don't know that. But they were for bringing in one of the dorm rooms, and they were caught. So fine. So my son, they were called individually into Rav Butman's office. Rabbi Kaplan is a very, very special educator. We were called into Rabbi Kaplan's office, and so my son said he went into Rabbi Kaplan, and Rabbi Kaplan said, you broke curfew. I said, what were you doing? He knew what they were doing. Well, we sort of got into it for bringing. We were discussing something. There was some topic they were discussing. We were having a hard time stopping, and so we just sort of kept for bringing about this topic. So he said, well, I have to give you a fine. They give fines. Right? It's so ridiculous because they fine them and they get the money from their parents, but whatever. So they give him a fine, right? 10 shekels. So fine. So he gets a 10 shekel fine. He says, and I want you to do it again. Fine. And as he's leaving, he says, Lebush, yeah, I'm proud of you. Mm-hmm. That's education. You're going to get a fine. This is the wrong thing to do, and you broke the rules. Kol hakavod. Mm-hmm. You were bothered by somebody so much you stayed up for bring late. That's education. But you're going to get a fine. It's against the law. You're going to pay. Right? I mean, that's one of the interesting things about democracy. You're allowed to break the law and demonstrate, but you go to jail. But you're allowed to do that. They're not going to kill you in the street. Right? You're, so to speak, allowed to do that, but you might pay the price. Okay, you're allowed to do that. It's interesting. You also have to realize as an adult you might pay the price. Just like the physical korban. Had a mizbarer. Hanitzutze datzach. It's rectified the sparks of datzach, doimim, mineral life, semeach, vegetable life, chai, animal life. Because every single, we all, well, not all, obviously rocks are only doimim. Vegetables have some doimim and have some semeach. Animals have some doimim, some semeach, and some chai. And humans have all three of those plus medaber. So too about the spiritual elevation, spiritual sacrifice. It's rectified, and transformed, the darkness, the nefesh ba'amis, to light. The nefesh ba'amis does not have to be a vehicle of darkness, it can be a vehicle of light. The nefesh ba'amis is the reason we're all sitting here learning Chassidus right now, because our nefesh ba'amis wanted to learn Chassidus, because conscious me made a decision to get up in the morning and come to Chassidus. Okay, that's amazing. Conscious me can make the same decision to do all sorts of things that are contrary to Elokus, but conscious me can also make decisions that are very, very powerfully connected to Elokus. That's all. Now back to what we were talking about in the first chapter, and that's what it means. V'asuli mikdash. Do those things necessary to connect to Kedusha, which is what the Rebbe just described on this page. And what happens? And I will dwell in them. What does that mean? In each and every one of us. Each and every one of us will have Elokus banging around in our head because we brought Elokus into our conscious reality. How do we do that? By learning about it. That's as much as, some people get nervous when you talk about intellect. Intellect is the gateway into our reality. It starts in our head. It doesn't end in our head, but it starts in our head. That's where things start, right? And even emotional experiences are experiences that we become aware of in our head because that's where our conscious reality is. Okay, then of course it's supposed to penetrate into the rest of our body, obviously with something positive. Through his Aveda, on the level of his kafia, subduing the Yetzer Hara. So therefore I can become a kli for Elokus. Because I can't become a kli for Elokus if I'm involving myself in all sorts of activity that's contrary to Elokus. I have to clean out the kli. Va'ikr, and the ikr is a mevi lidei ishafcha. The ikr is bringing oneself to the level of ishafcha, transforming. Hine kadis kafis sitracha, like we said in the first chapter, and the Rebbe is going back to it. Kadis kafis sitracha. When you subdue the sitracha, what happens? You bring about a revelation of a level of light that exists in all the worlds equally. And what's that? Seviv kol almin, bechinas ha'or v'gili, the level of light and revelation. Shehu bebechinas seviv kol almin. And our Rebbe told us ultimately it's atzmos. You're connecting to atzmos. Kitzer. Yavar explains inyan of karbonis ba'aveda, the whole notion of karbonis in Aveda. And what is that? The Adam Kiyakri. Since the Rebbe is only going to say in the Kitzur, there's only one of the two pshatim in Mikem Brat, the second one. Adam Kiyakriv. The first one is telling me I'm able to do what has to happen in the second one. Right? The first pshat is you can do whatever has to be done. Okay, well, what do I have to do? Well, that's the second pshat. I have to sacrifice the Nefesh Habahamis. Elevate it. Not destroy it and beat it up. Elevate it. Illuminate it. Educate it. The Adam, Ki Yakriv, Tzarech Li'es Mikem Korban, has to be from you a Korban. What's that? Eish Shalamayla, there's a fire from above. The Eish Milamata, there's a fire from below. Now we're trying to ignite the fire from below. How do we ignite the fire from below? With help from the fire from above. What's the fire from above? Avad the Nefesh Elokis, the love of the Nefesh Elokis. What's the fire from below? The love of the Nefesh Habahamis. The Avad, the Nefesh Elokis, the Nefesh Habahamis. That's the fire from above and the fire from below. Avad, Nefesh Habahamis. And how do you get the Nefesh Habahamis to experience love for God? Baal Yidei Lavshus comes through clothing, Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Habahamis. And what does it mean to clothe the Nefesh Elokis and Nefesh Habahamis? Lizbeinen, Bizbeinenus, Eloki, Shagam, and Nefesh Habahamis Yuchal Lasig. To think about godly matters that also human intellect can understand. And then it becomes part of your conscious reality. And we have a fighting chance to actually think about something other than ourselves every now and then, which is an amazing thing. Amazing thing. How do we do that? By trying to think about God. And if we think about God, we might not think about ourselves as much.
What is God?
Kusha. A daled in Aramaic is like a shin in Hebrew. So kad is like the word, like the prefix in Hebrew, kusha, which means when. Kusha achalti, when I ate. Kad. In Aramaic, you can write a word. You can't write a word, chav shin. It just doesn't work. Kash. Yeah, we did it. We finished chapter 2. Very excited. Okay, we should have rugalach, except we don't eat it.
So Rabbi, we're thinking about the concept of leGani matter that even the Nefesh Bahamis understands. We creating fire from below.
Below, fire from below. Fire from above is the Nefesh Elokis. Fire from below is the Nefesh Habahamis can also love God.
Mm-hmm.
That person I refer to as I, that person can love God. That person has no chance of loving God if that person doesn't know anything about him and can't talk about him, think about him, bring about him. Right? I mean, we've talked about this so often. You know, how deep is our connection to 18th century French art? Not very deep. Why? I don't know anything about it. Right? So, I mean, how much is that part of my life? The only time I ever mention 18th century French art is as a mushal for those things that we don't understand. That's the only thing I know about 18th century French art is that I don't know anything about 18th century French art, so it's a very good mushal for things I don't know about. So all sorts of things I don't know about. Okay, beside that, but 18th century French art. Now, what if one came to the conclusion that it was very, very important to know something about 18th century French art? Say, what would you do? So you'd read books about 18th century French art, right? If you were really serious, you'd probably say, I don't think I can really understand 18th century French art unless I understand French. So I'd imagine most of the best books written about 18th century French art would be written in French, right? And I would probably do well to go to France and hang out in some museums in France, because I mean, that's sort of where all this happened. Okay, this is if I really want to know. That can be expressed in Yiddishkeit in all sorts of different ways. Right? I'm going to go to places where Yiddishkeit happens. That doesn't mean I have to come to Eretz Yisrael. It doesn't mean I have to necessarily go to yeshiva. I mean, even though obviously yeshiva is a reasonable thing to do, right? But that would be, I'm going to learn about it. Okay, but I also want to sort of immerse myself in some reality of 18th century French art. Okay, that's reasonable. And who what kind of people am I going to hang around with? if I'm really interested in 18th century French art.
Teachers, scholars.
Teachers, scholars, and other students of 18th century, other people who are into, the 18th century French art, I'm probably going to hang around with them. Is that snobby? No, that's just reasonable, right? Again, lahavdil, but it's real life. Golfers tend to hang around with who? Golfers. Why? Because they like to talk about golf, so they're going to hang around with other people who share this interest that they have in golf, right? And tennis players hang around with tennis players, right? Now, that's not the only people they hang around with, but they spend a good deal of time hanging around with tennis players. Why? Well, because they're interested in tennis, right? Is that a reasonable thing to be interested? Well, there's certainly better things to be interested, probably worse things to be interested in, but okay, that's good exercise, right? Fine. Better than golf, right? It takes a lot less time. Okay, so that's perfectly reasonable. So if you're into French art, you're probably going to hang around with people who are into French art. So if you're into God, who are you going to probably hang around with? Other people who are into God. Oh, I don't have any secular friends. There's other things as secular Jews. I think that's a wrong word. Okay. I have any non-religious friends? Because I have non-religious friends, but I spend most of my time hanging around with people who share my interests. That's what most people do, right, in life. Why? Well, because I'm interested in it and I want to talk about it and I want to live it. And so I'm going to hang around with other people who have to share that interest because it's really something I find very important. Okay. Am I going to encounter other people in my life? Of course I'm going to encounter other people in my life. Might they have a very important place in my life? They might have a very important place in my life. But it's also, I have to realize that when I'm involved in that relationship, I'm not able to fully express those things that I'm really interested in. So I'm not going to seek out that relationship as much as I might otherwise. That doesn't mean chas v'sholom to cut off people. I don't talk about cutting off people. It's natural to spend time with people who I share interests with. It's a normal thing to do. Okay, but if there's people in my life who I have a very, very close connection to, with most of those creatures called Balei Tshuva have all sorts of people in their life who don't have necessarily very much to do with Yiddishkeit. Okay, I was going to spend a lot of time with them. Why? Well, they're my family. Okay, so I'm going to spend time with them. But that doesn't mean that it's not, somewhat frustrating to be in a situation where I can't really express who I am and what I'm really interested in to the extent that I'd like to. Okay, say that. So every now and then I'm going to, disappear and go find a Farbrengen, to just go hang out with people who actually know what I mean when I say what I say. That's what always amazes me about shluchim. Shluchim spend the vast majority of their time with people who don't really understand anything about them. And they can't really have a serious conversation with, which is amazing. It's incredible Mesiras Nefesh. Now, Baruch Hashem, with Zoom and all that, so you can connect. My son was just telling me Thursday night there was a very interesting Zoom Farbrengen. I got back from a Farbrengen late at night and I went into our house. My son was visiting, so he said, there's an interesting Zoom Farbrengen tonight. So it was the yahrzeit, the 10th yahrzeit of Rabbi Ashkenazi from Kfar Chabad, and all sorts of people all over the world on Zoom were talking about Rabbi Ashkenazi. Okay, well, very so, and some of them one of them was in Ukraine, and one of them was in Moscow, and was, okay, so they could, fine. So that's nice today. There's no doubt about it. But it's still nice to sit down across the table from a human being that you can actually like he's there. You can squish his hand and talk about things that you actually care about. Okay. So how do you get to the point where you care about it? Well, you talk about it and you learn about it and you bring about it and right? And then it starts to become something you actually care about and becomes your life. Okay. That's how you do it. And you can do that with something that has no meaning whatsoever, or you can do that with something that has absolute meaning and is very, very, very powerfully connected to the essence of who you are, because you're a piece of godliness walking around in Olam Hazeh, because you have this Nefesh Elokis. So then that's much more powerful than anybody's connection to French art. French art is, on some level, it must be self-serving. Just has to be. You can't learn French art, lishma. There's no such thing. Whereas your relationship with the Eibusher could be connected to something completely and totally transcendent and beyond you and amazing. Okay, so second parak in Bosi leGani. Ubezeh Yuvan. Let's go a little further. Now the famous part of Bosi leGani, and this everybody's heard the ideas probably, the main idea in the next 2 chapters actually, is, well, actually the whole rest of the Maimon on a certain level, is Ruach Shtus, a spirit of folly. Based on everything we've learned, we now understand why the Mishkan was made of atzei shittim wood. Now, it is interesting that the Torah says you should take atzei shittim and build a Mishkan. What exactly is atzei shittim? So very often in the English translation, it is translated in italics, shittim. They don't translate, just say shittim wood. Sometimes it's translated as acacia, which is a funny translation because basically acacia is a type of tree that does not grow in the northern hemisphere. Right? Oh, we'll talk about that in a second, what someone you might know uncovered. Right? What kind of wood did we use to build the Beis Hamikdash? What kind of wood was it? What did Yaakov bring down to Mitzrayim a couple of weeks ago? Well, it wasn't acacia. What was it? Nowhere does it say it was acacia. Cedar. It's all cedar. Right? That's what grows around here. Cedar trees. The first Europeans who came here and planted forests, the reforestation of Eretz Yisrael, which was amazing. Because Eretz Yisrael, when the Yidden came here, was just barren because the Turks burnt everything down. They just burnt all the forests down, the Turks. And they were here until the First World War. So when the Yidden came, so they started planting trees. But interesting enough, the trees they knew were pine trees. So they were planting pine trees, which are not really, they're not generic to here, and they're a crummy tree to plant in a forest, because the pine needles fall in the forest and kill everything on the forest floor, which would be good if California had pine trees all over the place, then their forest floors would have not been full of all the stuff that they didn't clean up, and these fires wouldn't be so bad. But it does not so good for what's underneath, etc. But finally they did realize that if you look in Chumash, what's the natural tree in Tanakh? What's the natural tree around here? Cedar. Arzei Lebanon, the cedars of Lebanon, and Yaakov Avinu planted cedar trees, took cedar trees to, and in Tanakh it's talked about the cedar that was used to build the Beis Hamikdash, to build the Mishkan. So why is it called atzei shittim? Right, now it is translated often as acacia, right? I have to admit my sin, that I used to be very upset at the fact that anybody would translate it as acacia and consider them a complete imbecile, because how can you possibly say it's acacia wood? Because acacia wood doesn't grow in the northern hemisphere. So then I opened up the single best English book ever written, which is the California Chumash, written by Rabbi Moshe Wisniewski. And he translated the Torah, and in his translation of the Torah, he looked at 60 different translations of the Torah, right, including Goyim, right? He looked at all the translations of the Torah to write a good translation of the Torah.
Wow.
And lo and behold, when he translates shittim, he says acacia. So I called him up, him being my close friend. I call him Moses, and he calls me Benny. Bracha is a benediction, right? So he calls me Benny, and I call him Moses. I said, Moses, I have the bone to pick with you. He said, what's your bone to pick with me? I said, why did you translate shittim as acacia wood? There's no acacia wood in the northern hemisphere. So he said, Benny, I worked very hard on that, right? And I couldn't understand why everybody said acacia. He said, first of all, acacia is a subspecies of cedar. It is a type of cedar tree, first. Second of all, he said, I was translating. He said, I know what the Medrash says. And of course, where did we get the wood? We got the wood from the wood that Yaakov Avinu brought down to Mitzrayim and planted in Mitzrayim. That's how we got it. That's absolutely true. Okay, but often when you're translating, you just have to translate it literally in terms of what this word might mean. So he said, it happens to be that I found something very interesting as I was meandering through my botany books, trying to understand what this stuff really is. And he was very serious when he worked on this Chumash. That's why it's such a good book. He was looking at botany books to figure out what plants were that are mentioned in the Chumash. Oh, he's like that kind of person. That's why he did it. So the only place in the northern hemisphere where there is any presence of anything that is related to the acacia tree that grows in the southern hemisphere is the southern Sinai desert. In the southern Sinai desert, there's acacia wood. So Al Pi Pshat, that isn't where they got the wood. They got the wood from Yaakov Avinu, bringing it up. That's a medrash, and it doesn't say that anywhere in Chumash. So if you're going to translate it, you're going to translate it literally. So he said, I translated it literally. It does seem to be that Shittim wood is acacia wood, and they could have run into acacia wood because there's acacia wood in the southern Sinai desert. The only place in the northern hemisphere, evidently, according to his botany sources. So that's just an interesting, piquante little piece of information that he uncovered, right? So he translated it acacia. But generally, there's what is it? We're going to see now. Why does the Eibishter refer to what we know is cedar as acacia, as shittim, right? Not acacia, shittim. Well, why? Okay, well, let's see. Because the Mishkan's made from atzei shittim. Well, what's atzei shittim? Why not just say cedar, which is Erez, Aleph Resh Zayin, right? And later it talks about the Mishkan being a place of Erez. It talks about it. That since the essential Aved in the Mishkan and the Mikdash, who is Lishafcha Chashuchel in the Hara, to transform darkness to light, and the whole existence of the Mikdash is a very powerful expression of that, to the extent that you take physical reality and turn it into a kli for godly revelation, literally gold, silver, copper, wood, stone. Well, no stone in the Mishkan. Right? Okay, skins, cloth, all sorts of stuff, and turn it into a place where the Eibishter is mamash revealed, a house for the Eibishter, mamash. Okay, and also the Aveda there, and that's what the Rebbe is focusing on. Shezeu inyan Avedas HaKarbonos Canal, and this is the whole idea of the Avedas of Karbonos, is to transform darkness into light, as we learned in the second chapter. Ubefrat, and particularly the highest Aveda in the Mishkan and the Mikdash, which was Maisa Keteris, the incense offerings. Why is incense higher? Well, it's interesting. The word keteret itself comes from the Aramaic, means kesher, a bond, whereas korban means to be close, but not to be one with. Keteris is one with. Right? Chad ketira is katarna, with one tying, I'm tied up with you, the Eibishter says to us, the Zohar. Right? With one bond, I'm bound with you. So Keteris is a closer relationship. What's unique about Keteris? Well, the sense of smell is a very unique sense, because it's the only sense that wasn't polluted by Chet Eitzadas. We heard about the tree, we saw the tree, we touched the tree, we ate the tree. Nowhere does it say we smelled the tree. So that's that's the most powerful gateway into your neshama, is reach. That's why when someone passes out, smelling salts will help them. A light might not, calling their name might not, smelling salts might, nothing might help if they're really out, right? But smelling salts will help more than many other things, right? Directly to the source of it all. So the Eibishter likes what does the Eibishter say all of Karbonos are? Reach nichoyach, a pleasant fragrance. So Keteris. Val yedei aveda shebamikdash, through our aveda in the mikdash, hine al yedei zeh, by virtue of this, heir gilui elokus beilam, we bring about a revelation of elokus in the world. Lochein, therefore, and I'm sure it's all going to be understood completely and totally, hayam yatzeh shittim. Therefore, it's matzeh shittim. You got it? No. I didn't explain it yet. He just said it's atzei shittim. What's atzei shittim? So he's going to explain what are atzei shittim. Tehine, shita, the word shita. So we know that word, shita. What's his shita? His shita means his opinion on something, meaning in a particular argument, to which side does he lean in a particular argument? To this side, to that side, Rashi, Rambam. Okay. What is shita? Perish nitiyah, to lean. Dahainu, sheyesh There's something in the middle, a middle ground. Vataya lays tzad, and leaning to either side, lamayla, lamata, or above or below, nikra shita. That's called shita. Having a particular position. V'chein perish shtus. So too the word shtus, which is folly, idiocy. A shaita is an idiot. The shtus, who ha'ataya, is leaning away me from hayadiyah v'chochma. Someone who acts in a shtuti way is leaning away from a rational approach to this reality. The idea of asaga, the rational approach, understand knowledge and understanding, comprehension. Hu derech hamitzua, that's the middle road. Vataya mitzeh, and turning away from this nikra shtus, is called shtus, acting in a way that's not rational. Vihine yesh shtus delumazeh, there is negative shtus, shtus of the other side, shtus of klipa. Okay, by virtue of the fact that the Rebbe just said that, there's shtus of klipa, what does that seem to also indicate? There's something called shtus de kedusha, because if shtus is klipa, so the Rebbe wouldn't say there is shtus of klipa, he'd say shtus is klipa. No. Shtus isn't necessarily negative. There's also something called shtus de kedusha, which we're going to learn about in the 5th chapter. But in chapter 3 and 4, the Rebbe is going to explain shtus de klipa, shtus de le'umazeh, negative shtus. Ukamesha Kosev, what's the source of all of this? Pasuk in Chumash. Ki tiste ishte. Let's talk about the isha seita. Now, a seita, really, the word is spelt with a samach. And if you look up the Gemara, so the back of the Gemara, when it says what tractate you're looking at, it will be spelt with a samach. The isha seita. Who's the seita? The suspected adulteress. Okay. Now, in the Torah, interesting enough, it's spelt with a sin. Ki tiste ishte. When she becomes a seita. Okay, but what word is also there? What Ki tishte ishte, when she acts in a way that is not rational. She acts in a idiotic way. Ki tishte, but it's really tiste ishte. Upedish Rashi, has Rashi explained that word? Tat midarke asniya, she turned away, she leaned away. Same word, netiyah. She leaned away from the ways of modesty. Now, even if she wasn't guilty of the Aveira that she's accused of, she still was acting in an immodest way by being seen with a man who's not her husband in compromising situations. Okay, so she's definitely not acting in a tsanua way. So that's why she's called a Satan. Hopefully, there was no Aveira, other Aveira. Uksiv, it also says, relative to a certain place that Am Yisrael was, this is when we ran into Baal Pa'or, the whole story with Pinchas, V'yeshev Yisrael b'Shittim, we were in Shittim, a place of tremendous folly. Shu inyan shtus de le'umazeh. The shtus de le'umazeh. Ukemaimer Chazal, like Chazal say, Ein Adam Ever Aveda, a person does not transgress el imkein nichnas beruch shtus, unless it enters into him a spirit of folly. Okay. Let's read one more line, and then we'll start here tomorrow and understand all this. Ruach hazeh, this spirit of folly, mechasa al emes, hides the truth, covers the truth. Ruach shtus, this spirit of folly, ruach haklipa v'sitra achra. It's like klipa and sitra achra. Klipa, the shell, and sitra achra, the other side. Okay. Ein adam avera, that we learned from the Satan. Meaning every Aveda, Ein Adam Ever Aveda, Im Kein Nichlas Beruch Shtus, unless he's overcome by a spirit of folly, meaning every Aveda is temporary insanity. We'll talk about that tomorrow. Why is that? I don't understand. I have never Shabbos. You ask someone, why do you do Avedas? Well, I have never Shabbos. Why should I do Avedas? Okay. Do you walk into the middle of the street because you have never Shabbos? 8-lane highway? Rush hour, you just walk in because you have an Shabbos. Why not? No one does that. Okay, so why are there certain things we do that we might objectively understand are not reasonable? I don't do that. Those are things I might do. Okay, we'll talk about that tomorrow. We'll see what Rabbi says. amazing week.